I'm going to be dispelling some Soviet Union myths using some excerpts from Michael Parenti's Blackshirts and Reds. In 1993, for the first time, several historians gained access to previously secret Soviet police archives and were able to establish well-documented estimates of prison and labor camp populations. They found that the total population of the entire Gulag as of January 1939, near the end of the Great Purges, was 2,022,976. At about that time, there began a purge of the purgers, including many intelligence and secret police officials and members of the judiciary and other investigative committees, who were suddenly held responsible for the excesses of the terror despite the protestations of fidelity to the regime. Soviet labor camps were not death camps like those the Nazis built across Europe. There was no systematic extermination of inmates, no gas chambers or crematoria to dispose of millions of bodies. Despite harsh conditions, the great majority of Gulag inmates survived and eventually returned to society when granted amnesty or when their terms were finished. In any given year, 20 to 40% of the inmates were released, according to archive records. Oblivious to these facts, the Moscow correspondent of the New York Times continues to describe the Gulag as the largest system of death camps in modern history. Almost 1 million Gulag prisoners were released during World War II to serve in the military. The archives reveal that more than half of all Gulag deaths for the 1934 through 53 period occurred during the war years, mostly from malnutrition, where severe privation was the common lot of the entire Soviet population. Some 22 million Soviet citizens perished in the war. In 1944, for instance, the labor camp death rate was 92 per 1,000. By 1953, with the post-war recovery, camp deaths had declined to 3 per 1,000. Should all Gulag inmates be considered innocent victims of Red repression? Contrary to what we have been led to believe, those arrested for political crimes, counter-revolutionary offenses, numbered from 12 to 33% of the prison population, varying from year to year. The vast majority of inmates were charged with non-political offenses: murder, assault, theft, banditry, smuggling, swindling, and other violations punishable in any society. Total executions from 1921 to 1953, a 33-year time span inclusive, were 799,455. No breakdown of this figure was provided by the researchers. It includes those who were guilty of non-political capital crimes, as well as those who collaborated in the Western capitalist invasion and subsequent White Guard Army atrocities. It also includes some of the considerable numbers who collaborated with the Nazis during World War II and probably German SS prisoners. In any case, the killings of political opponents were not in the millions or tens of millions, which is not to say that the actual number was either inconsequential or justifiable. In Chapter 2, I discussed the role of popular revolution in advancing the condition of humankind. That analysis would apply as well to communist revolutions and is worth reiterating in the present context. We hear a great deal about the crimes of communism, but almost nothing about its achievements. The communist governments inherited societies burdened with an age-old legacy of economic exploitation and maldevelopment. Much of pre-communist Eastern Europe, as with pre-revolutionary Russia and China, was in effect a third world region with widespread poverty and almost non-existent capital formation. Most rural transportation was still by horses and wagon. The devastation of World War II added another heavy layer of misery upon the region, reducing hundreds of villages and many cities to rubble. It was the communists and their allies who rebuilt these societies, while denounced in the U.S. press for leaving their economies in bad shape. In fact, the Reds left the economy of Eastern Europe in better condition than they found it. The same was true of China. Henry Rosemont Jr. notes that when the communists liberated Shanghai from the U.S.-supported reactionary Kuomintang regime in 1949, about 20% of that city's population, an estimated 1.2 million, were drug addicts. Every morning, there were special street crews whose sole task was to gather up the corpses of the children, adults, and the elderly who had been murdered during the nights or had been abandoned and died of disease, cold, and or starvation. During the years of Stalin's reign, the Soviet nation made dramatic gains in literacy, industrial wages, health care, and women's rights. These accomplishments usually go unmentioned when the Stalinist era is discussed. To say that socialism doesn't work is to overlook the fact that it did. In Eastern Europe, Russia, China, Mongolia, North Korea, and Cuba, revolutionary communism created a life for the mass of people that was far better than the wretched existence that they had endured under feudal lords, military bosses, foreign colonizers, and Western capitalists. The end result was a dramatic improvement in living conditions for hundreds of millions of people on a scale never before or since witnessed in history. State socialism transformed desperately poor countries into modernized societies in which everyone had enough food, clothing, and shelter, where elderly people had secure pensions, and where all children and many adults went to school and no one was denied medical attention. Some of us from poor families who carry around the hidden injuries of class are much more impressed by these achievements and are unwilling to dismiss them as merely economistic. But what of the democratic rights that these peoples were denied? In fact, with the exception of Czechoslovakia, these countries had known little political democracy in the days before communism. Russia was a czarist autocracy, Poland a rightist dictatorship with concentration camps of its own, Albania an Italian fascist protectorate as early as 1927, Cuba a U.S.-sponsored dictatorship. Lithuania, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria were outright fascist regimes allied with Nazi Germany in World War II. Then there were the distorting effects that unremitting capitalist encirclement had upon the building of socialism. Throughout its entire 73-year history of counter-revolutionary invasion, civil war, forced industrialization, Stalinist purges and deportations, Nazi conquest, Cold War, and nuclear arms race, the Soviet Union did not know one day of peaceful development. In the attempt to maintain military parity with the United States, the Soviets took on crushing defense costs that seriously depleted their civilian economy. In addition, they faced monetary boycott, trade discrimination, and technological embargo from the West. The people who lived under communism endured chronic shortages, long lines, poor quality goods and services, and many other problems. They wanted a better life, and who could blame them? Without capitalist encirclement, they would have had a better chance of solving more of their internal problems. All of this is not to deny the very real deficiencies of the communist systems. Here I want to point out that much of the credit for the deformation and overthrow of communism should go to the Western forces that tirelessly dedicated themselves to the task, using every possible means of political, economic, military, and diplomatic aggression to achieve a success that will continue to cost the people of the world dearly.